Friends, live at lunch with Robin Riggs. We'll be beginning in about 30 seconds. Today we're talking about the food of Colonial, Virginia, specifically the humble pancake, and some wild stories that just might not know this little dish went on. Ready to hear about the humble pancake and what's happening in Virginia Beach? Don't forget to wait up for that drop report coming up at the end of the show. Getting ready to start live at lunch with Robin Riggs.
Tell you what, Rob, I'm ready to hear about some pancakes. You're making me hungry.
Tell me about it, Riggs. Hey, welcome everybody. Today we've got a great show for you. Riggs is on the line with me. As always, a pleasure to have you with us, Riggs. Today we're actually talking about the food of Colonial, Virginia, and we're going to talk about this in a couple of different steps. I hear you've got a story, or at least a couple of stories. Give us a little teaser about what you're going to be talking about.
Oh, I'm excited today. We're going to talk about some Colonial pancakes. You're gonna hit that one up, because I think you got the expertise in that area more than me.
We're going to talk about my favorite little spot, too. Yeah, we'll talk about my favorite spot. Yeah, you know it, but we'll keep that as a secret. But what stories are you going to tell?
I'm going to talk a little bit about some hardtack today. So it's kind of like for those of you familiar with what an MRE is in the military, it's issued to our troops, the meal ready to eat. Well, hardtack would have been the meal ready to eat of its time. Of course, it wasn't a nice meal with several different pieces and parts to it like a modern day MRE is. It was much simpler than that, but it was a good substitute and would last for years and years and years. Rumored to last about 25 plus years.
And that comes with something else too. Hardtack also has pork that goes along with it, some kind of pork. We'll be talking about salt pork as well. But Riggs, do you know why we're doing this show today on foods of Colonial, Virginia?
I'm not sure exactly why this subject was brought up. Well, maybe you can enlighten me.
Yeah. So I want to let everybody know this is one of the things that we love about Live at Lunch with Robin Riggs. Of course, this is a user-submitted topic. You know, last week we were talking about Gray Sherwood. We were talking about the particular pre-revolutionary times in Virginia when this was happening. And the question came up, you know, she had to work the field, she had to do this, that, and everything else. You know, what other things did this amazing woman do that went through all of that stuff? And one thing she did was cook, right? So we thought, hey, how cool would it be to focus on what an interesting kitchen would look like and things along those nature. And then in order to bring it all around, we thought, man, what about that pancake? You know, there's a journal of Nicholas Cresswell that talks about his life in Virginia before the Revolutionary War and just as the Revolutionary War is beginning. And he's an English subject, right, and a royalist too. But he came here from a large merchant family in England, and he came to Virginia in order to strike it rich, strike out on his own, do something different. He was one of the youngest kids of a large family, and he has a lot of really great details of the types of things that he ate here in America, and also some of the sentiment towards him as he traveled around early colonial America. So that'll be interesting. But all of those things are coming up here right after we get a chance to hit up that beautiful weekend weather. Man, Riggs, last week it got us, didn't it? The weather switched big time.
Oh, yeah.
So today it's looking like we're 66. Obviously, dreary day, overcast, rainy, out in Virginia Beach, winds around northeast 18 miles per hour. And it's got a gusty chance of winds up to 20 miles per hour for the rest of the day, as well as about 15% chance. I don't know. I feel more like it's always raining when it rains. Going into the weekend, it's going to be scattered thunderstorms, rainy and nasty. It's just doesn't look like it's going to be any fun. The sad thing is that's what the weather report looked like last weekend, and last weekend was great. So it's Virginia Beach, guys. It could change in any time. But as always, Riggs, have you been working on any film photography or any digital photography lately? I always like to give a photography tip to our listeners. What you been working with?
I got out a couple days ago and took some photos. Was out at a store with one of the youngins and found some stuff for Granddaddy that Granddaddy would like. So I took some pictures of him. Yeah. With this nice sign, this Jeep sign, to get out. I got to get that in the mail. Get it over to his granddad, a few states away. So, but the photos turned out really good. However, I did have to go in and edit them because the lighting conditions weren't right. I didn't realize it at the time.
Yeah.
So I had to get in there and edit the photos and kind of raise some of the levels and lower some of the other levels to kind of bring us out in the shot.
Well, I got a question the other day when we were talking about photography specifically with instant film. And the question was about how come sometimes with instant film, the color doesn't look proper, like the color balance of the photo, specifically indoors, doesn't look right. And you may not have this problem. So tip for you guys out there, you may not have this problem so much on digital cameras because it's all digital and it can the camera can adjust. But there is a thing called white balance. And if you're shooting film, film has a particular light, L-I-G-H-T, balance. And it's balanced based on daylight sun temperature in Kelvin. So most of the film and instant film you're going to shoot is actually balanced to daylight outdoors on a bright day. And when you go inside and you photograph with that blue balanced film indoors under halogen lamps, it shifts the color. That's why we get a color shift. And this can sometimes happen to your digital cameras. So if you're out there photographing specifically at night with long exposures, you're at the bar or at the club or outside with your sweetheart or the boys, and you're taking some pictures at night and you're in some mixed lighting conditions, like maybe you've got a sodium lamp from the lamp post outside, but you also have lights from a porch, try setting your white balance to something around 3700 or 4200 or 5500 in order to change those colors, especially if your digital camera is giving you a heartache. I tell you. And print your images, guys. Print your images, put them on the wall and be proud. And if that doesn't work, one final tip for you, black and white makes it right. So if color is ever a problem, just turn it black and white and you can immediately say it's artistic. So
yeah, those are good tips.
I love it. I love it. Today, we've actually sponsored by Yellow Box. Of course, this is a live podcast. We're using the Yellow Box in order to present today. And as this live podcast goes on, you can actually find us on thelocal757.com anytime you would like to hear about what we're doing. If you'd like to submit a suggestion to be on the show or have your music featured at the end of the show, get in touch with our producers over at live@thelocal757.com, and we'll go ahead and work that out for you. Also, as that continues, this is a podcast, so if you missed the live interaction here, what you get to see on YouTube, you can actually find us where any podcast is hosted at Live at Lunch with Rob. It's that simple. So let's jump into this topic, Riggs. Good old pancakes. I think it's worth talking a little bit about maybe what does a colonial era kitchen or cook look like. So let's before we get into the pancakes, what does a kitchen look like from then compared to now? What's the feeling? How early do we have to begin getting everything ready? Let me know, Riggs. Come on, what you got?
Well, it's a whole different process from start to finish. To understand it, you have to understand what they didn't have at those times. And because of what they didn't have, what that would require to put together the full meal.
Right on.
Nowadays, we have running water in kitchens. We have heated stoves, either gas or electric powered, that can get to a full temperature range that you can control digitally with the, press of a button.
Right.
And in those times, everything was manual and everything had to be thought out. And preparation, I feel, was the key to success. So, people were much more in touch with the food and the processes that it would take to get the food onto the table into not only an edible, but a delicious state, ready to be eaten and enjoyed by the family. And then another aspect of that to think about, and I'd love to get your feeling on this too, is the mealtime. People didn't eat as much then. There wasn't such a thing as a breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So when people did sit down to eat that meal in the evening, that well prepared meal, that was family time. That brought everybody together, and the meal was what often everybody bonded over and kind of was the glue of the family and the glue of society.
Yeah, I definitely have to agree with you there. And I think it goes a little step further. You brought up two really, really interesting points. One was that food needed to be delicious. And then the second was when or what people were eating. And I think I want to talk about food being delicious here for the first part. Food only needed to be delicious if you had money for it to be delicious, right? That's what it really came down to. As we alluded to in the intro, hardtack and salt pork was something that was a big deal. And that's what most people subsisted off of. In fact, food of the just the common folk of early Virginia food, early colonial Virginia food was really stew. Anything that could be stewed or brought back to or reconstituted in water or broth, that was basically it. And mainly for the reasons like you're talking about with hardtack and salt pork, because these things are preservation methods that allow for food to be kept for long periods of time. And that's a general type of food that you can keep for a long time because you're drying it out and there's a lot of salt in it that keeps, microbes from growing, or there happens to be very little water in it, like in the case of hardtack, where you might have some salt if you're lucky, but flour and water is pretty much it, and baked a bunch of times until there's no humidity or moisture in the hardtack. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. So, yeah, if you had the money for food to be good, I guess it could be good. But if you didn't, then you just needed to be able to eat. And the second thing you brought up was dinner times. And that was, or dinner amounts. And the biggest meal of the day, the meal that the majority of the great houses or the plantation houses or the well-to-do houses and even the farming houses, the big meal of the day was actually in the middle of the day. It was around 2 o'clock-ish. And mainly because you would have been up and began your day at first light, which, of course, could be around 5 a.m., 5:30 in different times of the year. Of course, that will change. And so between 5 a.m. and 6 a.m. and 2, you've already had 7 hours of hard work out wherever you're doing what you're doing, whether that be a blacksmith working in of course, a stable, a blacksmith studio, or whether that be, a farmer working out the field, or a coachman getting his taxi ready and things like that. All of those things would have happened. And one of the interesting early meals to prepare is the pancake, which goes by many other names. And I think one of the reasons it becomes easy to prepare is because of the construction of the kitchen. And I'm going to throw that back over to you, Riggs. What was the epicenter of the kitchen?
Oh, the epicenter of the kitchen was what would have been then the stove. So the stove or the hearth that they cooked on,
right,
which would have been brick. It would have been a brick surface top. But you bringing up the point about the main meal of the day being it too. I didn't know that. That's very interesting. I was thinking it would have been a little bit later in the day. So I'm glad you pointed that out, because that kind of changes my thinking on it a little bit. But yeah, the stovetop definitely is where they would have cooked, because they had to use fire. They had to manually generate heat through fire in order to cook their food or make anything.
Yeah. Yeah, and that being the case, when you get that, let's describe the kitchen. For most people, a common house or a plantation house or a great house or a well-to-do house, the kitchen was not just the epicenter of, the stove wasn't just the epicenter of the house, but the kitchen was really the heart of the home. It's where people prepared the food. It's where that camaraderie would come down. But you would not normally eat in the kitchen. You would go to a different place, a dining room. Many times, kitchens caught on fire, so the more wealthy you were, the higher the likelihood is that the kitchen or the place where that food was prepared was not directly attached to the house, or was attached in a way that made the kitchen less harmful to the house should it catch on fire. And this was difficult because that hearth that creates all of that heat that you're talking about for the cooking of the day, the warming of those bricks, was also a central part of the heating unit for the entire home, specifically the two-story homes and things like that. So in the wintertime, heating up all those bricks during the day allowed the brickwork, the hearthwork, to radiate throughout the home at nighttime. So the kitchen provided so many functions. In great houses, the interesting part about the kitchen, too, was that the people that worked in the kitchen, that was where the servants, and we're not talking any particular class, we're just talking about the people that made the house run, the people that did the labor of the house. That's where they would have their times of camaraderie. And that's where there was quite a bit of intermingling, specifically, we're talking about colonial times, between everyone, free men and enslaved men and women alike, as well as the different stewards of the house. And it's a place that only in some respects kind of crosses cultural boundaries because of the necessity of people to work in that enclosed area together. which is really interesting. And the scope of today's video really is about the food. And one of the foods that I want to talk about is pancakes. And I think it's a great time to talk about why I love pancakes. First of all, they're great, right? What do you think about pancakes, Riggs? Have you ever had a pancake that you didn't like?
No, I haven't had a pancake that I didn't like. In fact, I had Brenner last night, so that's breakfast for dinner.
That's a very American thing, by the way.
Yes.
The concept of breakfast for dinner, breakfast at nighttime, even today, is a very American way of thinking. It's interesting.
Yeah, I never get tired of breakfast foods, and pancakes are a staple, to this day. And I had them last night for dinner, and were just perfectly made. I can't take credit because I didn't make them, but they were made quite well. And I have a question for you. Actually, I was going to throw this one back at you. Why do you think pancakes are such a staple at the breakfast table even today? And where does that come from?
Riggs, I love the question because it really brings us into someone I'd like to give a shout out to. So Pocahontas Pancake House has been a staple here in Virginia Beach, a place to go and get tasty pancakes, everything from bacon and eggs, steak and eggs, crepe Suzettes, pancakes, waffles, you name it, they've got it. Great fresh squeezed orange juice and other juices. It's awesome. And if this sounds like a sponsorship ad, it isn't. It's just a place I absolutely love. So I want to talk to you about Pocahontas Pancake House. But it's not the only great little pancakes house in Virginia Beach. One that closed that my dad used to take me to was called Waffles and Things, and that was at the corner of Virginia Beach Boulevard and Atlantic Avenue. And it's no longer there, but they used to have all kinds of local art and make just great pancakes and eggs and stuff like that. And one of the things that I think that makes pancakes a interesting thing, right, is that it's an experience that's quick, fast, and can happen pretty much in front of your eyes. But what makes it a part of the American experience has to do with farming. And I believe how, just from my understanding of how the American frontier was, westward expansion, gained land in America specifically to allow us to expand from coast to coast, from sea to shining sea. But also we needed food that would give the people tilling the land and working the land energy. And so the concept of steak or pork or sausage and eggs and pancakes was an easy way to get your bread rather than necessarily making a loaf of bread, which most people would know how to do back in the colonial times and the times after colonialism during westward expansion. All of these things would happen. And so today that concept of that high energy, high protein, high calorie, huge meal really gets you going so that you can, build the foundations of what America is today, build the roadways, build the waterways, tame the land, so to speak. So I think that's where it came from. But I want to jump back to Pocahontas Pancake House. Have you ever, obviously I know you've been to Pocahontas. Tell me about your trips to Pocahontas.
I love Pocahontas Pancakes. It's one of my favorite places in Virginia Beach to go. And whenever I'm in town, I'll make it a point to try to swing through. I don't get there every time, unfortunately, but
yeah,
one of my best memories is just going there and sitting down and just the feeling of knowing that you were about to have probably the best breakfast you can get in Virginia Beach is about to go down.
Yeah.
And the pancakes there are just next level. All the food in there is great.
They're like an inch thick. How the heck do they do that?
Yeah. I don't know, man, but it's hard to pinpoint one, but I've got so many memories there. I remember going there one time with young Robert, and just sitting down and, worrying about the amount of pancakes that he was eating because it just seemed like he would not stop eating pancakes because there were so many. He loves
pancakes.
So good. It's like you eat past your limit when you go there because the pancakes are so good. You just keep putting them down. Before you know it, you've eaten 3-4 stacks and you had no idea.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's another great reason to enjoy Pocahontas Pancake House. And I think that kind of is bringing us towards the concept of the pancake, Right, but I want to give you a couple of things that I've been learning about pancakes. First of all, did you know Shakespeare wrote about pancakes in two of his plays? I didn't.
No, I
I
didn't know
can
that.
I can remember one right off the top of my head, which was "All's Well That Ends Well," and he talks about
Okay.
pancakes as the right and proper meal. And the knight, I forget in there, or one of the main characters. I'm pulling this off of my brain, so I could be a little bit mistaken in some of this, but they're talking about that the pancakes weren't that great, but there will be more. And the idea is that the pancakes were simple and easy to make, and even if they weren't great, you could still get your fill. And there's a whole poem about that. There are many different German poems about pancakes, which are interesting. And the concept of the pancake actually goes back to a Greek philosopher. I can't remember his name because it's difficult for me to pronounce, but back in 600 BCE, he writes about the pancake. So we have the earliest mention of this concept of a pancake written about back in prehistory, maybe not prehistory, but definitely the time of the Greeks. And going through there, the concept of the pancake did not always include flour. So that's something else that I'm finding, which is going to lead into hardtack. Not that hardtack is a pancake, but in colonial Virginia, you had pancakes and you had hoe cakes and you had corn cakes. And all of these were made with a different preparation or a different kind of main floured ingredient, whether it be corn that was ground coarsely or corn that was ground very, very fine, or barley, or whether it was flour. This concept of a cake that could be mixed into a batter and fried was very important. And then they had bicarbonate of sodium, which we know is a leavening ingredient. The concept of a fluffy pancake. Think about this. A fluffy pancake is not something that is very old, and it's also something that was usually a more expensive ingredient. So a fancy pancake. So the idea of this fluffy pancake that you get at Pocahontas Pancake House, that's really living high on the hog, because that's what one of the great houses would have, or the very well-to-do houses would have, this very fluffy pancake. And maybe the less well-to-do people would have these harder pancakes that were more rubbery, depending, or may had, like in the case of corn cakes, ground corn, but also pieces of boiled corn put in there, or roasted corn, in order to, make them taste a little bit better. But those ingredients lead to something else. What else were people eating back then?
Well, they would have made stews. They would have made hardtack, salted pork, and every time I think of salted pork, I think of Gimli from Lord of the Rings when they have been out in the wilderness and they get back and the hobbits are like, "We've got salted pork," and the look on his face is like, I could just imagine someone from that time, getting so excited about salted pork, And then,
you're right. Salted pork was a big deal back then. And you mentioned stews. What was some of the reasons people would get so excited about salted pork after coming off the frontier?
Because they weren't eating as
That's
well.
Right. Yeah, they were hungry.
They were hungry, so it would have been a staple food. It would have been one of those things that when you think back to your mom making you something when you were a kid, or your dad making you something when you were a kid, and it's your favorite meal, and you think back to that, food has emotional ties to it. It brings you to places and feelings and sensations that can bring comfort, and I think that's an important aspect.
Right.
And people in the past would have been no different.
Well, when you talk about this idea of things that bring you home, one of the things, I think, who was it? Napoleon said an army marches on its stomach and not on its feet. If that quote's wrong, I've heard the quote somewhere. I believe it was him. I might check it while we're going. But the Romans, right? We know that Romans went and the Holy Roman Empire, right? They went and conquered and did all what they did and had a republic and then finally trashed and burned after expansion and everything else. But one of the specialties that you got from being a soldier was an allotment of food, specifically in, poundage, or a measurement of pork or meat, as well as a measurement of flour or rye or barley, and then different spices. And back in the day, the Romans made a pancake out of flour, eggs, and milk that were dipped with one of the first ideas or the first recordings that we have of maple syrup or honey being poured on top of a pancake, right? So here we have the concept of this altia or this sweet cake, right? Which is what they called them, the altia. And they were just flat cakes of egg and flour and milk and maybe salt, maybe not salt. We know that maybe you have some salt. There's always a little bit of salt in there. But they were then fried on a pan, or more likely a hot rock put in a fire that was sufficiently flat. Okay.
Yeah.
So they were fried on this hot rock and then scooped off and eaten. And then to make them even more enjoyable, the scavenging parties and the Romans who would hunt as a squad to go out and have that squad level task, they'd collect honey and different things or syrup from trees, and they would distill it down when they had the time, or I guess pillage it or buy it, however they got their trade if they weren't issued it directly. And then they would sit down around the fire like you might do in a campsite in the Northwest River Park or at First Landing State Park, two great places to go here in Virginia, Hampton Roads, and have breakfast and maybe even an egg, having pancakes and eggs just like you and I do 400 years later, 500 years later at Pocahontas Pancake House. I mean, there's some connection to humanity there. That's interesting.
Yeah, definitely. And think about how great it was for the first guy, Roman soldier or otherwise. It was like, hey, you could pour honey on that pancake and it's going to be pretty good.
Think about that. You're the first guy to invent the honey dipped pancake or the maple syrup pancake. I mean, if he had only had an idea to patent it then, right? His family would be rich. They also liked berries and things on them. So this concept of pancake seems to be something that stems from continent to continent, and it seems to also stem around the idea of a mixed batter. And we talked a little bit about salt pork, which was dried pork, right? But also we have another kind of a batter. You talked about it earlier. Talk about hardtack. This is something else that people might eat back then, and it's related to pancakes, but only because of the batter. Everything else is different. So talk about it.
Well, hardtack, it's got a long history. I don't know where it first came out. I'm sure it has a lot of roots, but it was used for military and exploratory purposes a lot. So going back to like the Lord of the Rings kind of thing, it would be like the lambda spread that the elves give to the hobbits on Frodo's journey. It would be like that.
You've been watching a lot of Lord of the Rings lately.
Yeah. But however, it wouldn't be nearly as delicious, I'm sure, as what lambda spread would be if it were real.
Yeah.
But hardtack is very simple, and it had an extremely long shelf life because it had to survive. This was pre-refrigeration, so it had to survive any kind of weather, humidity type of conditions, so that people, sailors at sea, soldiers during long trips at war who get separated from their supply lines might have to rely solely on hardtack, which would be the minimum level of tradition or nutrition required just to survive. I think of a novel I read many years ago. It was on a required reading list for me, and it was called Rifleman Dodd. It was a historical fiction. I think C.S. Forster wrote it. Came out in the 30s. It was a good book. It's about the war between England and France, in which England allied with Spain and Portugal to stop Napoleon's invading army. And Rifleman Dodd is the story of a rifleman in the British Army named Dodd who gets separated for his unit. And while he's separated from his unit, he wages guerrilla warfare on the French because he's so devoted to his duty, and he's able to do that because, he has a ration. I believe, I could be mistaken, but I believe it's because he has a ration of hardtack, and that hardtack, he rations that for himself and survives off of that for a while. I could be mistaken on that, but it's been so long since I've read the book. Either way, a soldier in those times, and even before those times, because that war took place in the early 1800s, I think around 1810.
Right.
Around that time, And before that, hardtack would have been issued to soldiers and sailors to help them survive along with salted pork. But salted pork had to stay in a barrel. Only small amounts of it could be taken out. Once it was taken out, it was almost like taking it out of refrigeration where it wouldn't last. Whereas hardtack, you could wrap it up in, a cloth and throw it in your satchel and carry it with you and survive off of it for a long time when you weren't able to forage, for food. And I remember being in grade school, and one of the assignments we got was we learned about hardtack and what its history was, and we made some, but I must have made it wrong because my mom helped me make it when I was a kid. We made it, I ate it, and then I got sick after eating it.
Yeah, you made glue. You mixed flour and water and got glue and then ate glue. That's a lot of fun. But that brings me to another kind of concept. While we're talking about things to eat, let's keep that in mind. Hardtack, something that's going to break your teeth, needs to be put into a stew or a soup in order to just be able to get through it.
Yeah.
But Rick's Cafe, that's another local favorite, guys. I got to tell you, Rick's Cafe, great place to go and eat. I've been eating at Rick's Cafe since high school, guys, since I was 16. And the thing I like about Rick's Cafe so much is it's 24/7 breakfast. But COVID put it into the 24/7, but you can get breakfast, lunch, and dinner there, steak and eggs, all that kind of stuff. I've been there with all of my pals and buddies from back in the day. You even get ribs over there. Rick's Cafe, even President Obama visited Rick's Cafe, I believe, during his last term, like 2 years before it was over. I can't remember the exact year, but they've got a signature of him over there on the wall or a picture of him or something like that, which was, hey, you like Obama or you don't? That's still kind of neat that the President of the United States ate there. That's kind of cool. Riggs, I don't know. I think we've been to Rick's Cafe a few times together, but we didn't go there too much time during high school, did we?
No, not too much during high school. After I moved away, left town, we did go back there when I came back in town to visit a few times.
Oh yeah, we've been there. And my favorite thing to get while there is their 3-egg omelet all the way with, guess what? Say it. Pancakes.
I was going to ask you, I was going to say, wait, you're telling me the 3-egg omelet's your favorite and not pancakes?
No, it comes with 2 gigantic pancakes, 2 8-inch pancakes. And I'm like, you got this, right? Bacon, eggs, mushrooms, sausage, pancakes, and lots of butter. So I really feel like that Roman centurion sitting there on the battlefield, except I'm in a comfortable booth eating with a knife and fork off of a plate that someone served me from inside the kitchen.
Here's the question for you then, without putting you on the spot. So who's got the better pancake, Rick's or Pocahontas?
Oh, Pocahontas. Pocahontas all day long. Yeah, no doubt. There's no. It's not called Rick's Pancake House for a reason. It's called Rick's Cafe. Gotcha. It's a cafe. Pocahontas Pancake House. They're putting it out there. It's pancakes. Yeah. What they do is pancakes. But I wanted to give Rick's Cafe a shout out because this show, Live at Lunch with Robin Riggs, it's the local 757 show, guys. I want to remind you, this is a live podcast that we're playing here on YouTube. You can interact with us online with the comments, but it's actually a podcast. You can find us anywhere, and we are the official podcast of the local757.com, where it's all about Virginia Beach, Hampton Roads. And as this podcast continues, and we like to talk about the businesses that we enjoy going to. So Rick's Cafe, Pocahontas, a Pancake House, these different types of institutions are great places to get some food. And we got another one coming up for Sunday brunch. I'll talk about it a little bit later in the show, but it's one of my more favorite kind of higher end restaurants. If you want to spend more money for breakfast, you can. And that's coming up later in the show. But just a moment ago, let's recap. Riggs, we were talking about hardtack, and we were talking about salt pork. And I think something that's important to talk about with salt pork is salt pork. Describe what that is to people. Like, what does that look like? I go to the market, and I need a barrel of salt pork, or I need some salt pork. How does that work at the marketplace? And how, I guess I will follow up later with how does that work in the kitchen. But let's just talk about the marketplace.
Oh, salt pork was it, man. It was the staple back in the day. So
like eggs, a traded commodity.
Yes. And it was so important, so vital because it lasted so long.
Uh-huh.
And it was so what they would have considered nutritious. Their understanding of it was very different. They didn't have all the scientific ability to measure nutrition content like we do today. But it would have been a staple because it was made with a high salt and fat content. And in those times, people didn't have sugar injected into their food. That's a whole other separate conversation. But there's so much sugar in our food today that doesn't need to be there. Whereas in those days, people were almost on the keto diet just by nature of what they ate. They subsisted off fats and salts more. But I think it would have been so important. And because of that, it was actually regulated. Now, I don't remember all the things. I was going to ask you this, like, wasn't there some kind of regulation you were telling me about with the way, salted pork had to be, sold at the market? There were some kind of restrictions on it or something like that. Well, can you enlighten me on that again?
Yeah. So first of all, salt pork was actually sold by the barrel. Generally speaking, a number of pigs or hogs in a barrel that had been salted and prepared in a certain way. The entrails taken out, all the disposable pieces removed, but everything else was left as it was. And it was drawn and quartered and sectioned out. And it was sold in the barrel and packed in salt, as in salt, heavy salt like you would think of shaved rock salt today. And that salt packaging actually dried out the beef. Or the pork, excuse me. Now, you could have salt beef, too, but that was a much more expensive commodity. So salt beef, not something that was generally on the table of the common folk of the time. And even when it was on the table, it needed to be regulated, like you were asking about, because the government, the early government, and this time we're talking about colonial Virginia, right, which is pre-Revolutionary War, which is we're still under the rule of the King of England at the time. So there were edicts, there were laws that the colonies had to follow throughout the Commonwealth nations and everything, and throughout the Kingdom of England, where people had to be given the right to buy a fair product. And those regulations for what that product was, how many feet were in a barrel of salt pork, isn't that important? Because if John over here buys a barrel of salt pork and he gets all the butts, which is the shoulder, we call it a butt, but it's the shoulder. That's the best part, and the bellies for bacon, right? But what if Paul goes over there and he buys a barrel of salt pork and he gets all the jowls and feet, so all the jaws and the feet. So one guy gets the best and the other guy gets the worst, right? All for the same price. They needed to make. You'd be pretty mad. There would be uprising. It'd be like bread riots and such. There'd be a problem. And so there were regulations and inspectors and taxes that went into providing the fact that you would get a fair quantity of pork no matter which barrel that you purchased. And salt pork was not a wet thing either, guys. So when you think about this, the salt in this packaging would actually dry the pork out over time. So it was dry aged in a respect. It may have been cured ahead of time with smoke, but that was a different thing. There could have been some smoking that the pork would be allowed to drain all of the fluids out while it was, being prepared, and they may have smoked it afterwards. If that was the case, that would mainly be there to kill any insects that might try to bore into the pork at the time. While it's being drained, you can think of burrowing flies and other insects like that could do that. And then that would be further quartered, chopped up, and packaged into a barrel with heavy levels and layers of that salt. So the salt trade was huge, like getting salt here from all over the place. I can't even think of any places off the top of my head, but bringing in salt and mining salt and having salt was important for that. So all of these things made it up, which meant that by the time you got a piece of salt pork, all that moisture has been wicked out because of the salt. You might actually have an extraordinarily hard piece of extraordinarily salty meat, which another reason the stew was basically the type of meal for most of the common people was because all you had to do was cut off a piece, add water to it, put in some hardtack, and you had a boiling stew that was salted from the salt pork, tasty, because the salt pork through that curing process did taste good, like a salt cured ham, except for much more zing in flavor because of, dry aged and everything. And then the hardtack would break up as it was boiled and create a slurry or a mush that would reconstitute that broth that you could eat. And some people would even fry that. They would take that mush, put it on a rocket or on a stove and fry it and make a kind of cake out of it in order just to eat it in a different way. So, yeah, there you go. Lots of fun with the salt pork. What do you think?
Yeah. To your point about salt, salt was extremely important in those days because it was the main ingredient used to preserve a lot of meat. They would dry things out and use salt as it was kind of the initial artificial preservative, except it wasn't artificial, it was natural. And then, salt was so important and so valuable in those days. That's where the expression "a man who's worth his salt." In the ancient world, a lot of times, what was virtually or was pretty much slave labor in the Roman and pre-Roman era, people would be given a ration of salt. And salt was so valuable that they would say that man is worth his salt because they paid him literally in salt. And if he was a good worker, quote unquote, he would be treated better and be given his salt and be known as a man who was worth his salt because of his work ethic or, things like that. So salt has a long tradition with mankind of being used, and being sought after and valuable. We take it for granted today, I think, how available it is because of modern technology, our ability to mine salt and put it on the dinner table and go into the grocery store and paying $2 for a thing of Morton salt was unheard of in those days, and having it just refined and ready because it was so useful.
Yeah.
And, that's kind of interesting. It makes me think of one of the Native Americans, indigenous peoples' staples of food, pemmican. I don't know a lot about pemmican, but I know it was something that they made that would have been their version of hardtack or salted pork.
I know that a lot of settlers make pemmican as well, and pemmican is really a tallow or lard product that's boiled down until it becomes basically a portable soup in a way when you reconstitute it. And
it is? Okay.
Yeah, and it's a hard strip that you get that's a little greasy, and so it's made out of these different things. Definitely travels well. It's one way of preserving food. You might make pemmican. I don't know that you would necessarily eat pemmican in the same way that you would eat salt pork. In case I think that, from my understanding, I believe that they would be for different times, and mainly because of the taste.
Yeah, definitely. So, what do you think you would enjoy the most out of the old time foods? Which one do you think would be your favorite?
Well, I think that salt pork and hardtack are definitely staples for a reason. There are ways that these are prepared even today, and there's Hair of the Dog up in Williamsburg. Shout out to Hair of the Dog. Has a wonderful, wonderful restaurant where they make colonial foods, and it's usually with a modern twist. So they're really colonial inspired foods, but they've got beef jerky with rare bitter sauce, which is a traditional take on a kind of cured meat, which is pretty good. Actually, I like it quite a bit. And they also have different stews that are the types of stews that you might find in after Revolutionary War America. Maybe not so much colonial America, but it's in the colonial district up in Williamsburg, so they have a lot of that. And one of the things that they have had in the past is salt pork and hardtack. And I never had the salt pork and hardtack, but I did have the split pea soup once, and that used salt pork in it. And so they're apparently actually would cure the salt pork in a very similar way. And so you had this completely robust, very zing kind of flavor out of the salt pork, which made the split pea soup really come alive. I don't usually like split pea soup, but this was really, really good, and I enjoyed it. And those dishes are kind of seasonal or episodic, I guess you could say. So I don't know if they still have it, but it's definitely worth checking out. Actually, I said Hair of the Dog. That's one of the drinks. It's Dog Street Grill. I was incorrect.
Oh, okay.
It's Dog Street Grill. But when it comes,
hair of the dog's a good name.
It's also a good drink for curing that hangover. One of the things I like to talk about too is I want to kind of bring everything back full circle. We've talked about this, but this idea of the pancake, and the concept was to talk about, food in colonial Virginia, and the hero of our show today was the stoic pancake, the happy pancake, and the thing I want to talk about that is. Why pancakes survive so long in times when you would have things like salt pork, hardtack, and these other more long-lived, more shelf-stable foods. Why do you think that is?
Refrigeration. The requirement to.
Oh, let me rephrase. Why do you think the pancake is still around? Why do you think it survived so long, right? After the creation, in a world where salt pork and hardtack was it. You think refrigeration?
Yeah, I think refrigeration, and the way the way I kind of logic that out is that the other foods, didn't require refrigeration to keep, but they required, a fair amount of work to prepare. Whereas foods nowadays, we can just refrigerate them.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, you're talking more modern. I got you.
Yeah, we don't have to make shelf-stable foods, whereas the pancake stuck around because it's simple, easy to make. It has a lot of variations, and it's very delicious. And it's a comfort food that people associate with breakfast.
Right.
Which is my favorite meal. Breakfast foods are my favorite foods with very few exceptions. Mm-hmm. So I'm simple. I'm a steak and pizza kind of guy. But I mean, if you offer me a fried egg sandwich on lightly toasted bread, I might take that over anything else, honestly.
Right.
The pancakes on the side. So I think the pancakes survived whereas some of these other foods didn't, because the other foods were labor intensive, and we just don't need to make foods like that anymore because we have refrigerators everywhere. Mm-hmm. So I don't think it's that difficult to keep our food as it was in the past. And we put all kinds of preservatives in our food nowadays anyway. So they have a lot of foods that used to not have a shelf life, have a shelf life now, which is, because of the ingredients that they're made with.
Yeah.
So I think that contributes to it. But the pancake itself is just, it's a pancake. It's light, it's fluffy, put butter and syrup or honey on it, and it's.
We've been making them ever since the dawn of time, apparently, if they've been going back that far, right? Yeah, no, I would have to echo that. I agree. I think that the ease of use, right? Refrigeration, maybe, right? But the ease of creation, you get an egg, you crack it, you put an egg in a cup of flour, a little bit of milk to make it thick but slightly runny, and just a pinch of salt and some leavening ingredient like baking soda, right? Or baking powder, and then you put it on a grill and flip it after it fluffs up, and there you go. It's a pretty simple recipe that's difficult to mess up. I know I've messed up plenty of them, but I got them pretty fluffy now. I can't make them as fluffy as Pocahontas, but yeah, it's stuck around for that. And I think the reason that gets easy is one of the first things you do in the kitchen when you start, back in the colonial times, is you get the fire going, because the hearth has to warm up. And there may have even been some of the embers going from the night previous, so it's got a little bit of a pre-warm. But you have to prepare the hearth. You got to prepare the stove. You got to prepare that whole area in the kitchen, and that area would look like a fireplace that was much larger than what we think about in a house today, with a hearth, the area that you sit, that was much larger than what we have today. And it was larger because you'd put things close to the fire in order to, cook them or brown them. You'd hang things over the fire. So it needed usually the fireplace in a kitchen would be around 3 to 4 feet tall. It'd be about 4 feet back and 4 feet as a square, 4 feet long and 4 feet deep. That way you could get a fire built in there and then get into it and put, things like spits and spikes that hang over top of it. And the hearth would come out 2 to 3 feet so that you could sit by the hearth and put many different things like pies or things that you'd want to heat up. And in that area where you're not cooking directly on top of the fire is the perfect spot when you have that space on the hearth to heat up a flat piece of iron, right, to make a pancake. It's just that simple. And pancakes, although enjoyed by Roman soldiers as we go through, if they weren't the fancy pancakes, they're the types of things that you might have as a perk of being a steward or a servant in the house, right? And the house masters might actually, or the great houses might actually have fluffy or fancy pancakes with sweetmeats like raisins and stuff like that placed into them. But you'd still get the leftovers, which would be maybe just a little pancake. Easy to eat, easy to slip in your mouth and keep going. Easy, just a fun, good time. So I think that's kind of why they stick around. And I hope that they stick around another 1,000 years. It seems like pancakes, it's hard to go wrong with a pancake.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, and I think it's I think it's an underestimated food. You know, people look it over a lot, but it's really, it's you know, as we've alluded to today, it's a very integral part of, you know, American cooking and foods, even traditional foods, which I didn't even know it was so readily available, you know, until you started talking about it all the way back to the colonial times.
Yeah, they were there. And I think that's great. I really like it. I hope that you guys, if you're out there listening, don't forget to send us your submissions. Give us your best recipe. We'll post it on the Live at Lunch website over here on the Local 757. It'll be a lot of fun. But that's going to bring us into, it's time, man. It is time for the drop report. What is happening in Virginia Beach? Today, we've been talking about pancakes and things to eat. I think it's apparent you got to hit up Pocahontas Pancake House this weekend. If you don't, you're missing out on some tasty, delicious pancakes. If you don't hit them up, go to Rick's and get one of their omelets with 2 beautiful pancakes on the side. And if you can't do that, hit up my favorite spot on the beach to go for crab cakes and everything else. That's Sunday brunch at Rockefeller's Restaurant right there at Rudy Inlet. Beautiful vistas overlooking the inlet, small marinas that's there. Rudy's is right beside it if you prefer Rudy's. But hey guys, I'm going to start a fight here. I'm going to tell you I think that Rockefeller's has the better Eggs Benedict. Get some of that special carrot cake made by Melody that's out there. I think she's still making them. If not, well, it's too bad. I love their carrot cake anyways. Their coconut cake is so great too. But make sure you have the Eggs Benedict or get the pancakes and eggs. It'd be a great way to go. Moving on over, 40 things to do in Virginia Beach. I found this off of virginiatraveltips.com. We've got a couple of these, but I like it. The Lynnhaven House on Whitehurst Road is a great place where you can go. It's built in 1725 and kind of connect to history a little bit. Tours are there, last about 50 to 60 minutes. It's at 4409 Wishart Road in Virginia Beach, Virginia. Just check out the Lynnhaven House. Google search lynnhavenhouse.com. Another great place I want to remind you guys, we haven't talked about this, and this might be a good topic for next week or the upcoming week, is the Military Aviation Museum. They've got the dinosaurs out front, which is really cool. If you like dinosaurs, it's not a problem. But they have all kinds of historic aircraft, even go back to biplanes from the times of Orville and Wilbur Wright, kept there in hangars, and some of them actually continue to fly. Most of them are actually flight-worthy, and they even have tickets where you can get on a plane. They're kind of expensive, but take a flying experience. My youngest son loves the Corsairs the most, so whenever we go there, and we go there at least once or twice a year, we always get pictures of him with the Corsair. The nice part is I've got military aviators that have flown in World War II and other conflicts in dogfights and everything else to sit there and tell you about the experience on the aircrafts that they flew. Maybe not that specific one, but that same type. Lots of fun, something really worthwhile checking out. And that's going to do it for our show today. You know, I want to remind you that this is a live podcast that we're doing. You saw us here on YouTube, but you can also catch us anywhere. You can find podcasts at Live at Lunch with Rob, and you can also, of course, find us at our home, thelocal757.com. Riggs, man, what a great time had you here today, chit-chatting. What was your favorite part? What you got coming up this weekend?
I'm excited about eating some more pancakes now. I don't have a Pocahontas pancake where I'm at, so I'm gonna have to go to IHOP, baby, or just make some. And just make some more at home. But
make them at home.
IHOP's got some decent pancakes.
Yeah,
they are the International House of Pancakes, after all. But if I could get a mom and pop place, I'll always go there first.
Absolutely.
But I'm glad you brought up the Aviation Museum. That's out in Pungo, isn't it?
It's on the way to Pungo on Princess Anne Road.
Oh, is it? Okay. Excellent.
Yeah. So it's halfway out there. It's really cool.
Oh, okay.
Hey, next time you come up, we have to go there together. It's a fun place.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it should be a good time.
And with that, my friends, we're going to say goodbye and sign off right now. I'm going to send you out to that beautiful song. Stay right there. Hope you have a great time. Thanks for watching, and we will catch you guys on the flip side. Bye for now.
All right.